I was going back. When did that start? And, or what prompted me to start reading Brendon's 6 Habits of Growth. And that was me hitting rock bottom. Now, not everybody's rock bottom is the same. And what may be your rock bottom today, if you were to have the same situation in 10 years, may not be that bad. You may have further fall. But at that point, so everybody's rock bottom is different, and all of our rock bottoms are different for different, and depending on where we are in our life. So what had happened at that point and where I was, and the reason why it was my rock bottom, is because I had never in my life, I have always said, hate is such a strong word. People use it too lightly. They use hate too lightly, the same way they use love too lightly, in that they don't really understand what the meaning of the word is. And so I have always said, I really don't hate anyone. I don't think I've ever hated anyone. The closest it's like the closest feeling that I think I had ever gotten to hate was I really abhorred. And I think abhor is just below hate. I really abhorred people who were prejudiced against people for no reason. Prejudiced people always were, like, they were the closest to hate I had ever gotten. Up until that point. Because at that point, I absolutely hated the person who was living with me, who I thought was my mother. Realize now that wasn't my mother, but I hated the person who was living with me. I wished every day that when I came home from work, my house would be burning down. Or that I would get the call that my house had burned down. Or the other thing I would always, every time I would see the person who lived with me, I'm not going to call that person my mother, but every time I would see that person who was living with me asleep on the couch, I kept looking and hoping that they wouldn't take another breath. Or that they would accidentally give themselves an overdose of their medication. So, that's the first time I ever have hated anyone, and I had so much guilt because that was the person who, at the time, I thought of as my mother, and how evil anybody could be to hate the person who gave them life. I mean, I think differently now, but that's how I felt at the time. I felt so guilty for feeling such a horrible, horrible feeling that I had never felt for anyone else, for that person. I was completely hopeless in that I could not, I was so in debt, and was basically, I had borrowed all I could borrow. I could work as much as I wanted, but my car, it was a new car, but my car, it was a newer car, all of a sudden it was starting to have engine problems. It wasn't because I was misusing it, it was because it was a factory recall. And I didn't know that at the time, but I thought, great, I'm not going to have a vehicle. I don't have any money to get it fixed. And I remember that there was the time before where I needed a pickup was my son, and he was the only person who I had really that I ever asked for help in the area, and we helped each other back and forth. Well, he had just moved, and so I felt like I didn't have anyone to call, and I felt helpless because a lot of times I am a lot of people's emergency contact, but I always struggle with who to put down. I always had struggled on who to put down as my emergency contact, because my mother has always been bipolar, so I never knew exactly where she was going to be. My sister is in and out of being homeless. She's also bipolar, and we don't have a lot of contact. I don't really know where it is at this point. That's what's healthiest for our relationship. My other son at the time didn't even have a phone, and we did not have a good relationship. And my father lives 3 hours away, so he's usually my emergency contact. At the time I was so down, I forgot about Nora and Virginia, who really are my emergency contacts, by the way. But I felt hopeless, and I actually had thoughts of not suicide, just wishing to go to sleep and not ever wake up. And the thing is I had attempted suicide when I was in my early 20s, and I have family members and friends who have committed suicide, and to me it's a very cruel and selfish act, and I am not a cruel and selfish person. And I realized that it's one where they felt like they had no option, and so I can have compassion and give them grace. But I know better, because I know that's just it. Is I didn't know then. I know now. I know now that because I had already. The other reason why I had started personal growth. I had started personal growth almost a year and a half prior. But I got to a certain point, I just realized I got to the comfortable life, and I got to a comfortable life, and then because it was so comfortable, it became a drug and a way for me to escape. And so I knew what I was doing. I probably wasn't making the best decisions, but it was the most happiness I had ever had in the time, and I wasn't ready to do any more of the work that needed to be done to grow more, which in hindsight I'm thinking I needed to have that, because there were so many more lessons that I learned during that period, and it got me to the point to where I just really grew. So that was my caterpillar phase, my ugly phase, and that was my I got really, really fat phase. And as far as not fat physically, oh, I love my cardinals. I love my cardinals who always come to visit me. Thank you. Thank you. Life is so full when you become mindful of the present. There is nothing ever so important, or very rarely, I should not use absolutes. There are very few things that are going on that cannot wait for 60 seconds to appreciate the beauty that's around us and the magic and the gifts that the universe gives us. Never. As often as possible. It's okay to stop and pause. Because the thing is now I'm creating a memory and adding another memory that adds time instead of oh my goodness, I don't remember what I had for dinner last week, or nothing good ever happens to me, or you have those. It's like, no, when you are present, you have so many things. It's like the difference between shooting your pictures in 1080p and 8K. You get so much more data compressed into your time that for some reason time expands. So it's really freaking awesome, man. God, I love quantum physics. Oh my goodness, I always have enjoyed it, but now that I'm getting it, I'm always one of those people who can understand, comprehend concepts, and when I hear about them, I can understand. But I think with a lot of people, to truly know, there's a difference between understanding and truly knowing. You have to, like, knowing you have the capability, or knowing that something is true, to experience it yourself. And I am experiencing the science. And I loved the science before I was experiencing it. And now to be able to combine those two, because I have had spiritual experiences that I didn't understand. And it's because I didn't have as much of the science, or science hadn't caught up to some of those things yet. Anyway, so